and welcome to the garden. Well, we're getting well into March now and there are plenty of things to be sown this month. Now, I haven't actually made any sowings yet this month, but before I do, I thought I'd do a quick update on how all of the other seedlings are doing from our previous sowings. So here's one of the pots of carrots that I sowed a few weeks ago, and germination has actually been pretty good. These are Amsterdam forcing. And you can see I'm going to have to thin these a little bit in due course, but I'm quite happy with these. They did take quite a while to show up and I started to get a little bit nervous. I suppose it was about 2.5 weeks before the first seedling poked through. That's probably about right for carrots, but because it was pretty cold when I sowed them, I was a little bit nervous that they wouldn't germinate at all, but here they are, safe and sound. And here we have some chantenay, and they're more or less at the same sort of stage. I will probably have to thin these out a little bit as well. So I'm pretty pleased with those. In the pots next door, we have our early potatoes. You can see these are just coming through now. So we've had these covered with fleece to protect them from the cold. Normally the greenhouse and our south-facing wall do a pretty good job of that, and we've never had frosted potatoes in here. So on to the peas that we sowed in lengths of gutter. Now some of these have come through already and I can see that there are new ones pushing through. So maybe after a few days this will look a lot better. But I'm a little bit concerned about the compost because I think this is a bit heavy and I wonder whether I'm going to get poor germination here. I've been struggling to get the moisture level right in this compost. It tends to form a pretty solid surface where the top dries out, and then underneath it will be very sticky. I mean, I've watered this not that long ago, so it is quite moist, but this stuff is really sticky and claggy, and that's not at all what I'd expect from this compost. This is supposed to be an organic multi-purpose, and I think the texture is very much too heavy for a multi-purpose compost. I think it would be very good spread on some veg beds, but as a mix for sowing in, it's really not very good, and I think as a general potting mix it doesn't work well. In the recent video on strawberries where I was potting up some bare root plants, I used this same compost, but by that time I'd already realised that it was pretty heavy stuff, and so amended it with some sandy soil, coir and vermiculite, and that ended up as quite a decent potting mix. So I wish I'd realised it in time to change the mixture for these peas. But we'll have to see what happens. If they don't germinate well, then I will just take out the individual plants and probably consolidate 2 of these into a single row. And then I can re-sow with some fresh seed into a different compost mix. Here's some of the onion seedlings. I keep them covered at night when it gets cold, but otherwise they just sit here in the greenhouse. So in the small pots we've got clumps of spring onions. Well, I've got white Lisbon there, that's the classic spring onion, but I've also got clumps of Rossa lunga differenza, which I'm going to take when they're pretty small and use them in a similar way. Next to the spring onions we've got the Roscoff onions. Now I did have 2 trays of these, but germination was pretty poor, and in the end I was able to consolidate both trays into one. Now I did mention the poor germination to the seed merchant because the other 3 onions that I sowed at the same time germinated much better. So I'm pretty sure it was down to the seed more than anything else. And they sent me a replacement packet of seed, and I will show you what I've done with those in a moment. So then we've got Tropea rossa, more of the long red Florence, and then Boratana at the end. So these are at the stage where I either need to pot them on pretty soon or plant them out. So I've just been waiting for the really cold weather to pass, and I think Possibly within the next week or so I will get these out into one of the beds, and I'll probably put a mesh cover over them, first to keep the birds away from giving them a tug, and secondly to give them a little bit of protection. But I think they should be okay if I get them outdoors now. So in these two cold frames I sowed 4 rows of Chima di Rapa, and at the front 1 row of radish. So when I sowed these, it was a bit of a gamble because the weather was pretty cool at the time and I wasn't sure whether we'd get reasonable germination, but it looks like we've done pretty well. The radish at the front don't need thinning, but I may have to thin the Chima di Rapa in places to give them a little bit more room to grow. So we're in one of the smaller greenhouses now where I do a lot of the sowing and potting on. And here we've got the dwarf broad bean, the Sutton. Now I've got these in reasonable sized pots, so I don't have to rush to get these planted, but I think they could probably go out within the next week or so. So here we've got the tray of lettuce seed that I sowed. This is going to be used as a cut and come again crop. You can just start to see the red sorts colouring up now. So here are the alderman peas that were sown in these deep modules, and these have done pretty well, I think. And you can see that the roots are coming right out of the bottom. So I think it probably is quite beneficial to have a reasonable depth in the cells if you're going to start them this way. So it's so warm in here today that I haven't got the lids on these propagators. So in this one I've got tomatoes of various sorts. Now I will be posting a tomato video a bit later, but for now I've got these seedlings well underway. So here are the chillies, peppers and aubergines. Now these germinated at quite different rates, so we've got plants that are, I think, fairly advanced for this time of year, and others that still have quite a bit of growing to do before they're a good size for potting on. These aren't going to be planted into their final positions until the end of April, or possibly even the start of May, depending on the weather. So they've got plenty of time to grow on before then. Here are the 4 pots of parsley that were sown a while back. Now they've germinated very well, and I need to prick out some of those. I will probably take a couple of pots indoors, and the rest I will prick out and grow on. And then we've got the Carantan leeks. Now there are still a few just coming through, so I think we're going to have plenty of plants from that sowing. So here we have a tray of Boltardi beetroot. Now these have germinated pretty well, all except 1 or 2 cells. In fact, most of these I've had to thin to, I think 5, possibly 6 plants. So these are going to be ready in a few weeks' time to plant out. So here we've got the celeriac, giant Prague. Now these seeds were sown just on the surface of the compost, and we've got pretty good germination. Now there's far more plants here than I actually need, so when they're large enough to handle I will prick them out and move them on into either modules or then small pots to grow on before I plant them out into the beds. Here's the tray of lettuce and rocket. So we've got 2 rows of 4 seasons, then we've got bloody Cos, then Tom Thumb, and then at the end we've got the rocket. Now these are doing reasonably well, I think. I haven't thinned the rocket and I don't plan to. The lettuce seedlings I did thin to a single plant. You might just be able to make out the markings coming through on the leaves of the bloody Cos, these sort of reddish brown flecks that give it its name. It's also known as spotted Cos. So I'm going to let those grow on for a little bit, and I will probably plant them straight out from here. I don't think I will pot these on. It does depend though on the weather conditions at the time. So the final collection of seedlings, we have a couple of rows of chard. Now germination on these has been a little bit patchy, so I set some more, and for sure now I've got plenty of chard seedlings. Here we've got dwarf green curled kale, then we've got Portuguese kale, Both of those germinated very nicely. And here we've got red drumhead cabbage, and these are looking great too. Here though is the Brunswick cabbage. Now they haven't germinated too well, and a couple of those seedlings look decidedly ropey. So I did set some more seed, but as you can see here, that hasn't done too well either. We've got 4 up, so I've probably got enough of the cabbages, but I'm not that impressed with that seed. And finally, you can see what I've done with the replacement Roscoff onion seeds. Now I've just sown quite a lot of seed in each one of these cells, and you can see that germination again is a little bit patchy. I expect there are still a few more that will come through, but I'm just going to plant these out in clumps just as they are, and I'll take these when they're a little bit smaller. So I didn't really know what to do with the replacement seed. We've already got quite a few that we've sown from seed. We've got overwintering onions and tons of shallots in the beds already, and between sowing the onions and getting the replacement seed, we've also picked up a couple of bags of onion sets. So I thought I didn't really need any more individual onions, and that's why I'm going to plant those out as clumps. So that's a little update on the progress of our seedlings. And there are 1 or 2 things that maybe could have gone better, but that's pretty much how it is every year. I'll return soon with another sowing video, and it won't be too long before we get the first of these plants into the ground, and that's always nice. But that's it for this video, so thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.